3 in the morning. You're there, motionless between the sheets, eyes closed, the measured breathing of someone at rest. To the world, you're sleeping. But there's something inside you that never stops, something that continues walking through infinite corridors of an invisible prison. Your soul wanders through the same circular thoughts, stumbles over the same anxieties, crashes against the same glass walls that you can't break during the day. It's an exhaustion that sleep doesn't cure, a fatigue that no amount of hours in bed can relieve. You wake up more tired than when you lay down, carrying the weight of an entire night where your deepest essence worked without rest, processing pain you don't even know how to name. Franz Kafka knew this. He understood this feeling of living imprisoned in a body that rests while the soul remains vigilant, fighting alone against ghosts that only it can see. If this experience resonates with you, if you also carry this inexplicable exhaustion that seems to come from layers much deeper than physical tiredness, then you've found the right place. This channel exists for people like us, who know there's an abyssal difference between being physically rested and being truly at peace. Here we explore these shadowy territories of human experience with the depth they deserve. We don't offer shallow solutions or forced optimism, but genuine understanding and real paths of transformation. If you want to be part of this community of souls seeking authenticity in a superficial world, subscribe now and leave your like. You're not alone on this journey, and every time you connect with us, you're creating a sacred space where truth can exist without masks. Kafka spent his entire life trying to decipher this enigma of the exhausted soul. In his letters, he described nights when he felt as if he were being judged by an invisible tribunal, as if each moment of supposed rest was actually an interrogation session conducted by judges he could never see clearly. It was as if his consciousness were a bureaucratic office that never closed, where phantom employees continued stamping papers and moving files related to crimes he didn't know he had committed. During the day, he tried to function normally, but there was always this feeling of being watched, judged, that something was fundamentally wrong with his existence, something that needed to be constantly justified, even during hours that should have been restful. This Kafkaesque experience of the exhausted soul isn't exclusive to melancholic writers of the 20th century. It manifests today in even more intense forms because our era has created new types of prisons for consciousness. We live in a world that forces us to always be available, always performing, always proving our worth through external metrics that never completely satisfy us. Even when we manage to disconnect physically, when we turn off devices and retreat to the silence of the dark room, our soul remains connected to a network of expectations and anxieties that has no off button. It continues processing all the conversations we didn't have, all the opportunities we missed, all the judgments we imagine receiving from people who might not even be thinking about us. The exhausted soul is one that carries the weight of living in constant dissonance with the world. During the day, you wear the necessary masks to function socially, to fulfill your professional and personal roles, to be the version of yourself that others expect to see. But at night, when the body finally surrenders to fatigue, it's your truest essence that takes control, and it's furiously aware of all the energy that was spent pretending, adapting, repressing fundamental parts of who you really are. It works tirelessly, trying to reconcile the person you need to be with the person you truly are. And this reconciliation is an impossible project that extends through hours of supposed rest. It's as if your soul were a nocturnal archivist in an infinite library, organizing and reorganizing memories, fears, desires, and contradictions that accumulated during another day of compartmentalized existence. It pulls out drawers full of moments when you felt misunderstood, examines mental photographs of social interactions where something seemed slightly wrong, reviews emotional contracts you signed without reading completely. While your body rests, your soul is too busy trying to make sense of a world that frequently seems to make no sense at all, trying to find patterns in a chaos that might be inherently patternless. And have you felt this exhaustion that goes far beyond physical tiredness, this weight of carrying a soul that never really rests, even when your body is completely relaxed? If you're going through this right now, if you recognize this feeling of waking up more tired than when you lay down, leave in the comments just this: my soul doesn't rest either. Your courage in sharing this might be exactly what another person needs to read today, to feel less alone in this so profoundly human and universal experience. The question that Kafka raised, and that resonates even stronger in our era, is whether this exhaustion of the soul is a defect to be corrected or a fundamental characteristic of who we are as conscious beings in a universe that frequently seems unconscious of our existence. Perhaps the exhausted soul is actually the awakened soul, one that refuses to accept the simplified versions of reality offered to us during the day. Perhaps it works so hard during the night precisely because it knows there are layers of truth that can only be accessed when we lower our guard, when we stop trying to control our personal narrative and allow the contradictions and complexities of our existence to surface. Kafka understood that living authentically in an inauthentic world is full-time work. His exhausted soul was the price he paid for refusing to accept conventional explanations about what it means to be alive, about what constitutes a well-lived life, about what should be the purpose of our passage through this world. He perceived that there's a fundamental difference between being biologically alive and being existentially awake, and that the exhaustion of the soul is often the sign that we're struggling to maintain this deeper consciousness in a world that prefers we remain sleeping even when we're awake. The soul that doesn't rest is frequently the soul trying to solve existential equations for which there are no definitive solutions. It grapples with questions like, why do I feel I'm always playing a role instead of simply being myself? Why do human connections seem simultaneously essential and impossible to fully realize? Why do I feel there's always something important I'm missing, even when I apparently have everything I need? Why is the feeling of being truly at home in the world so rare and fleeting? These are questions that can't be answered through daytime productivity or external achievements. They require the kind of deep contemplation that only happens in the silent hours when the social world finally releases us from its demands. The problem is that our culture treats the insomnia of the soul as if it were simply physical insomnia. We offer mechanical solutions to an existential problem. We suggest better sleep habits, meditation apps, relaxation techniques, as if the issue were merely a matter of mental hygiene. But the exhausted soul isn't tired because it worked too much in the conventional sense. It's tired because it's constantly translating between two different worlds, the world of social appearances and the world of interior truth. And this translation is work that never ends. Kafka described this condition as living perpetually on the threshold between two realms, never completely belonging to either. During the day, you participate in the world of social transactions, practical responsibilities, defined roles, but always with the feeling of being slightly displaced, like an actor who forgot his lines, but continues on stage improvising. At night you retreat to the interior realm, but discover that this realm also doesn't offer the promised rest, because it's populated with all the tensions and contradictions you accumulated trying to navigate between these two worlds. The exhaustion of the soul also comes from the constant vigilance we exercise over ourselves. We live as if we were being constantly evaluated by criteria that were never clearly explained, as if there were always the possibility of failing an existential test whose rules no one taught us. Even during sleep, a part of us remains on guard, monitoring whether we're dreaming the right dreams, processing experiences appropriately, preparing adequately for another day of social performance. It's a form of self-consciousness that has become pathological, where even our most intimate moments are experienced through the filter of external judgment. But perhaps it's precisely this exhausted and vigilant soul that keeps us human in a world that constantly encourages us to become efficient machines. Perhaps the soul's refusal to rest completely is its way of protesting against a way of life that treats existence as a problem to be optimized instead of a mystery to be lived. When your soul works during the night, it's not being dysfunctional, it's being faithful to a dimension of reality that the daytime world prefers to ignore. Kafka knew that real transformation happens precisely in these hours of apparent unproductivity, when we stop trying to control our experience and allow it to reveal itself in all its strangeness and complexity. It's during these nocturnal vigils of the soul that we sometimes manage to glimpse who we really are, beneath all the layers of social adaptation. It's when we stop trying to be someone specific that we sometimes discover our most authentic specificity. The question isn't how to make the soul rest, because perhaps it's not made to rest in the conventional sense. The question is how to learn to be at peace with a soul that works in ways different from those we've been taught to value. How to find dignity in existential exhaustion. How to recognize that carrying certain unanswered questions is a way of honoring the real complexity of human life. How to transform the soul's insomnia from a pathology into a particular form of wisdom. Perhaps the first step is to stop pathologizing this experience and begin to see it as important information about who we are and about the kind of world we're trying to build. A soul that can't rest under certain conditions is telling us something crucial about those conditions. It's signaling that something fundamental is misaligned between our deepest needs and the structures within which we're trying to live. The exhausted soul may actually be a soul struggling to be born more completely, trying to break the conceptual cocoons that keep it trapped in limited versions of itself. Like a butterfly that needs to go through a period of apparently unproductive discomfort before discovering it has wings, perhaps our soul needs to pass through these periods of nocturnal vigil as part of a transformation process that can't be rushed or externally controlled. What Kafka teaches us is that we can learn to inhabit this condition in a more conscious and less tortured way. We can develop a different relationship with our own interior complexity, one that doesn't require immediate resolution of all contradictions, but that can find a strange form of peace in the very turbulence. How to learn to be a good host for a soul that doesn't behave according to conventional schedules, that has its own rhythms and needs that don't correspond to social expectations about how interior life should function. This requires a fundamental shift in how we understand rest and productivity. Real rest isn't absence of activity, but conscious presence with what's actually happening inside us. Sometimes this means accepting that our soul is working on projects that our conscious mind can't directly supervise, that there are processes of growth and integration happening that can't be measured or controlled, only accompanied with respectful curiosity. The soul that doesn't rest during physical sleep may be resting in a different way, temporarily freeing itself from the need to maintain all social facades, allowing itself to experiment with identities and possibilities that don't fit into daytime life. Perhaps it's using these hours to do the kind of creative work that can only happen when we stop trying to consciously direct the process. Beginning to see the soul's exhaustion as a sign of intense interior life instead of a problem to be eliminated can completely change our relationship with this experience. Instead of fighting against it, we can learn to collaborate with it, creating more favorable conditions for this nocturnal work of the soul to happen in a less tortured way. This might mean dedicating time during the day to genuine contemplation, to questions without answers, to experiences that nourish our interior life instead of just our external needs. In the end, the exhausted soul that Kafka spoke of may be our most reliable ally in a world that constantly tries to convince us we're simpler than we really are. It refuses to accept reduced versions of our humanity. It insists on honoring the totality of our experience, including the parts that don't fit perfectly into conventional narratives about success and fulfillment. It keeps us awake to dimensions of life that can only be perceived when we stop trying to optimize our existence and begin to inhabit it with more presence and less haste. Perhaps learning to trust this vigilant soul is the first step to discovering what kind of rest it really needs and what kind of life it's trying to help us create.